in terms of planning, and different companies understand planning in different areas. And I would like to probably divide this into three broad areas. So one is the planning portion, which includes what? Capacity planning. So for example, how many pieces do I book for a particular month, a particular season? And capacity planning is much easier. It sounds simple, but it's a lot more complicated, because at the end of the day, your capacity is not pieces, it's actually minutes of production. And I know companies, I know quite a few companies which now look at it in terms of minutes, but at the end of the day, our capacity is basically how many minutes of production we have available in our factories. And of course, you divide it by the SAM of the garments you get, and you actually convert that into an actual number of pieces. Second aspect comes to allocating. So first is you do your rough capacity planning, which is monthly season planning, how much booking you're doing. Second aspect comes in allocating the planning and allocating styles to lines, so that basically we are doing our factory or line planning, which means which line gets loaded with how many pieces, which line, which style, etc. So which is a lot more micro planning, where we are actually dealing with line-wise planning. Third, you have to figure out, sometimes planning department also gets involved in terms of operational feasibility. Is this plan feasible? Can I commit so many pieces? What kind of machinery do I need to be able to execute these orders? Do I need any specialized machinery? Do I need any specialized skills? So that also comes part of the planning process. Lastly, risk assessment. What are the risks in your plan? And I think this part of I'll get to the some of the best industry practice, and I'll focus a little bit more on the risk assessment and risk mitigation, because this is an important part of the planning process. What are your risks to your plan? What is the mitigation to those risks? That's one, is the planning part of it. The other thing which I have noticed a lot of production planning departments do is they also do the execution, which means they are gathering information from merchandising, from supply chain, to see whether I can load a line or not. Every day, day-to-day coordination, getting feedback from the lines, how much has been produced, what was the absenteeism, do I need to do a plan versus actual, there's a deviation, do I need to change lines, etc., which is a lot more focused on day-to-day reacting and day-to-day follow-ups. So I would look at it, the planning role divided into two parts. One is the planning part and the execution part. And within planning, we talk about looking at your styles, risk assessment, capacity allocation, as well as overall capacity planning. So that, in a nutshell, would what be a planner's job typically in a company. Now in companies, this can vary from company to company. In some companies, you have industrial engineering, which doubles up as planning department. Sometimes planning is separate altogether. Sometimes it's part of the production department. So that can vary from company to company, but broadly, these are the activities which should be part of your production planning process. Sanjay?
Thanks, Gunish. I think you covered those two aspects pretty well in terms of, I think, important. One is planning, of course, is critical. The second most important is the execution, because without that, it's really not going to happen. So I think, thanks. I think that covered pretty well. And we'll hopefully get more questions on these as we move forward. But before we actually move to the next question, I was thinking we can do a simple poll. First of our polls over here. So let me launch a poll, and I'd request everyone, all the participants, to it'll just take a few seconds to kind of answer this poll. Right. So request everyone. think we'll just take probably another 10, 15 seconds more. Few people are still left. Right. I think most of the people have answered. Interesting points. We'll be happy to share this a little later on. So let's progress actually to the next question. I think that'll be better at this point in time. Yeah. So interesting, Gunish. I think, like you probably have seen, I think capacity planning seems to be coming up highest over here. Right. So I will, Gunish, I have the next question coming to you now. People do planning in different ways. So based on your vast experience and looking at a lot of the manufacturing companies, what are some of the best industry practices that you have seen companies follow in production planning?
Okay, Sanjay, I think this is a very important part of this whole webinar. And I think people would be most interested to know about what are some of the best industry practices when it comes to production planning. I'll start off with what I talked about earlier was have a very clear idea what your capacity is. And I think just getting to that number is a big challenge. Having a very clear-cut idea of what your capacity is extremely important. What does it involve? Getting to know your capacity. Because I can probably know today's capacity, which is fine. I take number of operators I have, multiplied by number of minutes I'm working, and I get a total how many minutes capacity you currently have. But I think it's important to also figure out what your capacity is going to look like 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 15 weeks, 20 weeks, 26 weeks from now. Now, for some companies, it's pretty straightforward. They have a very fixed amount of labor. The fluctuation isn't much. But in some companies, it can really vary a lot, especially when you have more seasonal business. So I think having a very clear-cut idea of what your capacity is important, and very important that both the merchant production planning are very clear what the capacity is. I know there is a tendency to talk about capacity in terms of number of pieces, and I think that's the industry norm. That's how we've started off. But I think we can talk about it externally, but at the end of the day, converting that into minutes of manpower or minutes of operator time available is extremely important to get a realistic idea of what your capacity is. Second, what I've seen is that good companies which are doing good planning are actually planning, which means before an order comes in, they've already done a bit of their homework. The planning department gets involved. It's not just sampling department creating their own samples, but I think having the planning department getting involved in the initial stages is important, because what is really important is, first of all, I need to know whether this garment is feasible. Is it production friendly? Production friendly doesn't mean just reducing the SAM or reducing operations, which is an industrial engineer's job, but also to make sure that is it matching with the kind of capabilities that your organization has, so that when your line loads, we are actually doing R&D at that stage. What machinery is needed? So that activity should have happened. What skill sets are needed? Do I need people who can do special kind of operations? Because at this point, if I've got 14, 15 weeks left before the order will go into the production floor, the order is not come in yet, I still have time to be able to train people and skill them up so that those specific operations can be taken care of. And lastly, what should be the supply chain expectations? I think that kind of exercise, if before an order comes in, I have seen companies do that where that feasibility happens. And by the time the order comes in, the order is confirmed, the team has a very clear-cut idea of what needs to happen. Third, I think dividing planning in terms of short and medium term is a good strategy. What I mean by that is, most companies I've seen their planning departments are working in a 0 to 3 week window. Basically, they are looking at what styles are going to go into production probably next week or the following week. And they're trying to chase up on those styles. and obviously looking at styles which are currently in production to make sure that the lines are always fed. But what we have seen is that divide your planning activity into two buckets. One are immediate orders, which is orders which are going to go into production or already in production or going to go into production in the next 0 to 6 weeks, because the approach to those orders is slightly different. And second is a medium term plan, which are orders which are going to go into production 6 weeks to maybe 12 to 14 weeks. Because in the 6 to 12 to 14 week orders, the approach or the focus is more on the supply chain. And the 0 to 6 weeks, the focus is a lot more on the production floor and in making sure your file handover is happening. So I think dividing this into, making this into two buckets is a useful way at looking at your planning process. One of the techniques that I have seen has worked well, and this is difficult to implement actually, but it gives very good results. It also depends on the kind of garments and the styles and the runs that you work with. But sometimes it helps to embed the planner into the merchandising department, which means rather than merchandising one running its own silo and planning working in a totally different silo, but embedding a planner inside merchandising is a useful exercise. But it's important that the planner then does not report to the merchandiser. The planner keeps reporting to the planning department, which is an important distinction, because the planner then becomes a voice within merchandising to actually talk about their expectations and ensuring the lines are busy. This requires a lot of finesse. It requires management maturity. But I think some companies that I have seen have tried that, worked well for them, where the planner is actually sitting inside the merchandising department. So that information gap is reduced significantly. The other thing which I can't overemphasize and stress is, if nothing else you do, put in a good TNA. A TNA is a lot of times production planning, if you really talk about it, they're actually cleaning up the mess of what's happened in the supply chain and merchandising or approval process. Approval is delayed by 10 days. And what are we trying to do in planning is reworking the plan, reorienting, moving the lines around and all that. Now, if you had a good TNA, if your TNA processes are followed well, you actually don't need to do so much of moving around later on. And I think having a very good TNA process with a focus on-time PCD will make a huge difference. Sometimes people end up, putting in a tool which is more of line planning, which is more of, trying to react to a problem or fixing a problem which has already gone wrong, rather than fixing the root cause of the problem, which is the TNA or the supply chain or whatever pre-production was supposed to happen didn't happen on time. Other practices which I've seen useful is create multiple plans. And especially that's a challenge when you have Excel sheets. You create one plan and then people keep changing that plan. A good plan has a backup plan. Okay. So if world was ideal, I would have, you can plan once and, everything will go like that. But unfortunately, we live in the reality of real life. So a good planning process has a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and even a plan D, which means a plan A is my ideal plan. If everything went well, plan B says, if depending upon the probabilities, depending upon my experience, depending upon what could go wrong, this is my plan B. Because having such plans pre-done gives you time for everybody to be on the same plane, same board, and ensure that you actually don't end up having a very suboptimal plan. So for example, if I plan A, where my cost is going to be, let's say 45 rupees a garment production cost. And if I switch to plan B, which means I might be adding an extra line, or I might be putting some extra overtime. I look at different scenarios. My cost will go to 46 rupees. Then I know this is the cost that I'm incurring when my plan goes wrong. Okay. So having multiple plans, a plan B, plan C, I'm having backups is extremely important. Lastly, stand-up meetings. having a review mechanism where every day what's happened on the production floor is discussed and analyzed, and root cause of that is discussed and reviewed is important, because then you can know whether the problem that you're encountering on the floor, is it a product related problem or is it a manpower related problem? Okay. And that will tell you whether this problem is a one-off problem. That means today the production was lower. Was it because my line setting was wrong? Was it some problem in the product? Or I just had some critical operations where people didn't show up. So then you can take a call whether you need to change the plan or need to plan for something else. And lastly, management by exception. There is only so much that you can plan. There's only so many things you can look at. So look at exceptions, have clear-cut rules of where there is an exception. Let me give you an example. One exception is if PCD is shifted by 3 days, send me a report. I don't want to know if PCDs are being done. I just want to know if PCD moved. Or if instead of one line, an additional line is added, the moment an additional line is added, it should send an alert to somebody saying that an additional line is added. Because just remember, for a lot of high fashion industry, every additional line is approximately costs about 50,000 rupees. So if you add an extra line, instead of doing it in one line, you do a same order in 2 lines, you've added at least about 50,000 rupees to your project, to your product, to that particular style. So these are some of the practices that I have seen work well. And I think if people can follow those, I think it'll give them great results. Sanjay.
Great, yeah, great insights, Gunish. And I was just kind of mentally making some notes when you were talking. I think you've spoken about the importance of the capacity, the feasibility study, dividing the planning into short and medium term, having a planner embedded in the fabric or merchandising team, and creating multiple, plan A, B, C. And I think one of the most important things which you did rightly cover, I think, was the TNA. I think having the fundamental TNA in place, and that I think we spoke in our first webinar, that was more the general TNA, is I think extremely critical to have that seamless thing integrated with it. But that becomes then the entire thing to make it most effective. So I think it was a great point. Right. I think we'll jump to this third question straight away right now. Gunish, I think often people ask that, how do I really know that my planning is effective? What are some of the key parameters that one should really monitor to measure the effectiveness of the planning department? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes. How do I, because actually at the end of the day, we're all looking for benefits, right? And that's important. So I think first way to look at whether your planning process is effective or not. Very simple. First, you benchmark where you currently stand. So, and the challenge I have seen in a lot of companies is that they don't even know where they currently stand. They don't even have a benchmark. So there are tools available where you can benchmark your own current costs. And actually knowing your current cost is very, very important. I have often seen companies where they don't even, the cost which is being given to them or being monitored from the industrial engineering or whatever production department is, if you add that and multiply it by number of people and garments for the whole month, you will find there's a big discrepancy between how much you are paying actual wages to people versus what you thought you would be costing per garment. So I think benchmarking is important, and there are tools available, including ours, where you can do these benchmarking and track these things. But I would look at 3-4 very key parameters, which I think companies should focus on rather than making it very complicated. Is one, what is your per piece cost of garment, planned versus actual? I mean, if you are having a variation which is more than 3 to 5% between planned versus actual, then essentially what you're doing is you're subsidizing your production. So whatever mistakes are being made in terms of supply chain not coming in, and I sometimes I'm surprised if you look at cost of fabric, maybe it's 100 rupees a meter, but the fabric doesn't come on time. The fabric has actually costed you maybe 130, 140 rupees a meter. So I think benchmarking, so people might really squeeze the fabric vendor and say, give me 1 rupee cheaper or 2 rupees meter cheaper. But if there's huge fluctuation in the way the fabric is coming in, I think, you'll end up spending, 20, 30, 40 rupees extra on the production floor because you got lost minutes, you got overtime, etc. happening. So I think measuring that and measuring it accurately is very important. So I would say first, measure your per piece per garment planned versus actual. Second, look at, of course, your on-time delivery performance, which is pretty much, I'm sure people monitor it, and of course our customers make sure we do that. And third, and this is something which I think is very important, is look at your plan accuracy. Now, what is plan accuracy really? Plan accuracy essentially is what you thought you would be producing, not today, but a month from now. So if I said today I'm going to produce 3,000 pieces and I produce 3,000 pieces, that's not plan accuracy. That is the job of the floor in charge. Production planning का कोई role नहीं है. There's no role of the production planning person to say, oh, I thought 3,000 and today we made 3,000. Okay, that's now the ball is in the floor in charges or the line supervisor's court. What plan accuracy really means is what I thought I would be producing. So if I said today I'm sitting on 25th of June. So I said on 25th of July, I should have produced 3,650 pieces. And this 3,650 pieces is across these 4 styles or 5 styles or whatever. Come 25th of July, if on that day I produce those same styles and the same number of pieces, then my plan accuracy was 100%. Because on a piece of paper, 1 month or 2 months before the style is being produced, you can actually get the most efficient plan. You will run the lines the best because there is no restrictions, because there is no problems have not started really coming in, right? So you actually you create the most optimal plan. And if your plan accuracy is 100%, then you actually have executed the best plan. So tracking your plan accuracy is very important metric. Most companies don't do that. It actually then hits up your per piece cost of garment, etc. But I think having that is very, very crucial and important. So these are 3 key parameters. The other secondary parameters I would say in terms of measuring it would be what is your overtime in your factory, planned versus unplanned. So if it's a planned overtime, fine, not a problem. Any unplanned overtime is a problem. So how much unplanned overtime you are having is something which one needs to measure, and it needs to, of course, ideally come down to 0. But of course, things happen in our company. Next is lost minutes. How many minutes are being lost? This will tell you how good your supply chain is performing. And so measuring that is important. Now, what I'm talking about, some companies it will be possible, some companies it might not be possible. Of course, one has to look at the kind of technology investment one wants to make. And again, also to what level of sophistication your planning and tracking mechanism is currently in an organization. Third is measure how many line changeovers you're doing in your company. I had earlier mentioned that, let me give you an example. For a multi-product factory, let's say, which is doing dresses and then, different types of products and high fashion products, one line changeover costs about 50,000 rupees. So let's say, let me give you an example. So let's say you've got 30 lines in your company, and on average, let's say your production run is 13 days. Okay. What that means is if you've got 40 lines, that means every month you're on an average having 2 line changeovers. That means about per line, about 1 lakh rupees is being spent, 100,000 rupees is being spent on line changeovers, which if you have 40 lines, you're talking about 4 million rupees, which if you look at the whole year, it's about close to about 48 million rupees. Now, if only you could run the lines by 3 days longer. So you'll have leaner lines, run it longer for, instead of running it for 13 days, run it for 15 days, 16 days. And the line changeover rate comes down from 2 to maybe 1.7. You do your numbers, it's going to save you at least 700,000 rupees a month. And you're talking about almost 1 million rupees or 800, about 8-9 million rupees per annum. So I think cost of line changeover, please track that. Track how many line changeovers are happening on an average per line, and track what is your pre and post line changeover cost is. Lastly, WIP in your factory. So if you have high WIP, chances are your planning is not that great. And I think benchmarking again your WIP and pre and post is a useful measure to know how effective a line your production planning process is. Sanjay?
Right, Gunish. Thanks again. So I think the points which you covered, so you did talk about some primary and some secondary, but I think that if I had to summarize some of the key parameters you just spoke about. So you talked about a per piece cost of garment, plan versus actual. You've talked about on-time delivery performance, plan accuracy, overtime in the factory, which is both planned and unplanned, the number of lost minutes, changeover cost, and WIP. I think these are about 5-6 important things which you raised. I think I'm sure that these kind of things would definitely help. So thanks. I think it brought out pretty well. So before we move to the next question, we would like to conduct one more poll. I'm launching another poll right now, and just kind of hit you. 1 second, please. Right. So how accurate is your planning? We'll just wait for another 10-15 seconds. We still have a few people yet to respond. Okay, I think I will end the poll here. Just probably another 5-10 seconds more. Right, thanks. I'm encouraging to see that there are still, there are people who are saying that it's been very accurate. That's very encouraging to hear. But I think maximum of the people have been saying that it's kind of somewhat accurate. A few of them are saying that, yeah, probably it needs to change. So, yeah, thanks for the information. Right. I'd like to come to another question here, Gunish. While we've talked about the benefits, the advantages, measurable criteria, etc., a very fundamental question. I mean, if I was a manufacturer today, I would ask that, how do I really know whether it's really worth the investment of actually buying a tool like this? I mean, is there a thumb rule or a guideline or saying that, okay, that this is my type of factory and yes, I should use it, or this guy should not use it? Again, is there a good ROI for this? I mean, what do you really suggest?
Well, I think there are multiple tools around. It's not just software, and we are a tech company, so obviously we'll talk about technology, but I think there are certain prerequisites if you want to go along this journey. I think very, very simple things. First, have a mechanism by which you can measure SAM, or at least you should have some formal way where any garment that you have, its SAM value for people who don't know standard allowed minutes, how many minutes you should spend on that style. That's important, and a reasonably reliable method of calculating that. You don't need tools for that. You can do it through experience, or you could do it through just people who are industrial engineers and people who are into production. Second, I think uh, planning is the second part. First, I think setting your supply chain right is important. And supply chain, no matter you take 5 companies and they would be dealing with maybe the same set of vendors, but you will have different results. And so it's not just कि मैं सूरत से काम करता हूँ so मेरा खराब होना ही है. No, I think good supply chain practices are important. We have talked about TNA in our previous webinar, so I would ask everybody to look at that TNA webinar as well. But I think the first thing you should do is, if you're not have it, have a good TNA mechanism in place. And TNA is nothing but helping coordination between your merchandising, fabrics, stores, and production planning. So having that is an important prerequisite. And let me tell you, in terms of ROIs, in terms of benefits, just putting in a good TNA tool, I have seen companies reduce the cost of production from anywhere between 6% to about 20%. Of course, it depends upon the production run and the how long the run is. But the shorter the run, the more benefits you will get. But anywhere between 6% to 20%, you can actually save in terms of a production cost by putting in a good TNA, which is linked to production planning. What I have seen is it requires a fundamental shift in the way production planning, supply chain, and merchandising interacts with each other, which is the biggest challenge. So if you can crack that thing where you can have a tool or you can have a mechanism by which the 3 stakeholders are actually on the same page and are aligned, and you're able to improve your on-time PCD, it will make a huge difference in terms of thing. In terms of ROI, a good, well-implemented one, you will have an ROI of few 100%, but it's the effort. It's 20% software, 80% is the way you set up your processes and the way you are doing the pre-production activities.
Great, thanks, Gunish. So, I mean, just a small follow-up question. I mean, you did mention right now in here that 6 to 20% production cost saving in production. But again, your experience you have seen with other organizations who have implemented good PPC tools. Are there any other metrics to kind of measure what sort of benefits they have gained from this? Or is this a good enough metric?
I think production cost, reducing production cost, having better factory utilization, and having on-time delivery. I think those are 3 very simple metrics by which you can see whether you are able to, you are getting the benefit. But at the end of the day, the ROI is basically how much money I'm saving, right? How do I save money? By having lower manpower, improving efficiency. And also let me also tell you from experience, I think making the worker produce 10 more pieces is far more difficult than actually having your supply chain problem sorted out, and you can easily improve. So, I mean, imagine a worker in your factory and you say, no, don't produce 60 collars, produce 70, and you can produce 70. Now he produces 70 and next morning there's no fabric and he's lying idle. In his mind, he thinks you're an idiot because he said, why should I even produce 70? Because even if I produce more, tomorrow to khali ho jana hai, aap logon ka fabric hi nahi hoga, there is no supply chain. So I think if you simply make sure that your supply chain is aligned with your production planning. So, planning if department, if they can spend a lot more time on coordination, this part of the operations, I think the productivity levels will easily go up without even having to tell the worker produce 10 more pieces. So I think that's a good metric of knowing whether your planning is okay or not.
Great. I think that kind of demystifies some of the thoughts which probably I had and maybe some others have. So thanks. Let's just come down to one last poll. Then there are a few more questions I think which have come right now. I can see, and we will try to answer them.
Let's answer. I think it's getting time, so let's.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly finish off this one last poll. Okay. Linking of TNA with planning. Okay, and this is a pretty simple one, and the last one, so appreciate if everybody can actually answer it. Right. I think I'll kind of end it here now. I think we kind of, so yeah, it's a pretty well balanced kind of a survey which has come here, but interesting. Right. So what I'll say, Gunish, there are a few questions which have come up here. So let me just kind of pick a few of them here, and let's just see whether we can kind of, give it. So there's one question which has come that is asking that even though we make a good DNA because I think of the supply chain disruption, we are not able to meet the PCD. So how do we ensure the supply chain activities reaching the material on time to the factory? I mean, is there any tools for follow-up? That's the question.
Right. I mean, there are tools available. I mean, in BlueKaktus, just we have a TNA tool where you can follow up those activities and get alerts, etc. So there are tools available, but you see, I think it's important to do analysis of why are there delays. And I think what ends up happening in most of our companies is we don't do a root cause analysis. We don't do a why analysis saying, okay, fabric didn't come on time. Okay. Let me look at the last 100 orders I did or 50 orders I did and say how many times the fabric came on time, how many times the fabric was not available on time, or supply, or not just fabrics. I'm saying whatever material was there, could be a sequence, could be a special label, could be something else. And what was the reason for that? And I'll tell you, if you do that analysis, and rather than doing it anecdotally where you just, mujhe pata hai wo yaad hai, so I remember, and everybody goes after that one person who made that one mistake, not realizing that it happened only once. If you do that analysis, let me tell you, you will get some very interesting insights. I can tell you, so some people know I part of a garment business. We realized that in our company, fabric was not the problem. People kept blaming it, but half the time, the information coming from the merchants was not correct, or the or the fact that the runners who were going to the fabric mills were not even passing on the right information to their fabric teams. So the fabric will say, I will produce this on 25th of, let's say, August, but people are pushing and saying, no, I want it early. And then the runner is not even communicating this feedback back to the management team. As a result of which, you get surprises. And so you have problems. So I think there is no silver bullet to a problem, but I think it's important is have tools which analyze data. First, collect data. So you understand that out of 10 instances, how many times, what problem was the root cause of the problem. And then you go one by one trying to figure out how do I address those issues. Lastly, based on this, you create your SOPs saying, okay, if I am placing fabric in Surat, this is my SOP. We all know the challenges we have, but still we go there, right? Because they produce certain things at a certain quality, at a certain price, which we all need. So I think creating SOPs based on different types of challenges that you face, you will realize instead of facing the problem, problems are not going to become zero. It's not going to happen, right? But instead of having it 5 times, can I come it down by 2 times, 3 times? And I think if you look at that in that perspective, I think you'll make a difference.
Great, thanks. There's another very interesting question which has come, and I think it's very, very basic. And I think a classic case of either a poor implementation or no implementation or an incomplete implementation. The question is that the people really implementing the production process have little or no timely access to information, need to change the method of working. So how do you keep everyone informed about the change scenario? I think it's an important question.
Well, answer to that is transparency. I think publishing data, and I think de-departmentalizing some of the things that you do. I mean, 20 years ago, I am been around enough to know 20 years ago how things operated. So 20 years ago, I remember merchant, fabric, all used to be the same table basically sitting. Orders come in immediately, by the evening fabric orders are placed and you are already up and running. Today you've got one department, merchandising, getting the information, then you have a sampling PD team, you have some other team, you have different teams. So you need to do that because the workload has gone up and things have become more specialist. But the information gathering and the information exchange with each other, everybody tries to protect it because people are sometimes worried that if my information is visible independently of me to others, then I could be in trouble. So I think it's the most important part is for management to actually create an environment where people are not scared of sharing information with each other. Now you can have tools such as an ERP tool like ours, or our TNA tool, where sitting as a fabric person, I can know what the merchant is doing, and if I'm merchant, I can know what the fabric department is doing. So without even having to call them up and ask for them or bother them for information. So I think putting in those tools and then creating a culture where people are not scared and worried about having their information getting shared. I think the mindset has to be that we are all together. We all have the one single objective is to make sure that we send the garments, send the production with the right quality, with the right price at the right time. So I think it's important and it's cultural. So actually, at the end of the day, everything boils down to cultural. So the short answer for that is uh, get a simple tool where you can share information. Second, and information should be accurate so that it cannot be fudged. So that's important. And
Accurate
second
and
is
real
creating
time
that
as well.
culture. Go ahead, Sanjay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was saying you said accurate. I said accurate as well as real time. That's important.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, accuracy means real time because the information which is 5 days old is of no value.
Great. I think we'll have time for a few more questions, Gunish, because I think we just have about 9 minutes left. Let me just pick up. So there's one question which has come, though it's specific to the planning, but I think it's the general. I think it'll be general for any kind of a automation tool adoption. The question is, what are the challenges to adopt planning tools? I mean, is it expensive? I mean, is it the cost or is it a lack of mindset change?
Oh, okay. So I think I don't see. It's a mindset change problem of who. I don't think it's a mindset problem with the planning. I think it's a mindset change of the way the management is and in terms of what they're allocating. If you look at what we discussed today, we first talked about what is the role of planning. I think if you don't know what you want from planning, no matter what tool you give them, what you do, you actually will get wrong results. So I think first, defining what the role of planning should be. Second, understanding what should be the SOP so that I can get my desired results. Regardless of the tool, if you can define this, what should be the role, what should be the SOP, and what is my measurement metrics, I think if you do that exercise upfront, it will make a big impact in terms of adoption of technology. Cost of technology is today very less. I mean, I gave you the numbers. If you, let's say, have even a 40 line factory or even smaller, 25 line factory, 25 line, let's say, maybe take 30 operators per line. So 750 operators in a factory. For a 25 line factory, good planning can actually save them anywhere between 1.5 to 2 crores a year. So, I mean, the cost of the tools is negligible. The biggest cost is the effort, the mindset, and making sure a SOP is aligned. And we tend to, in India especially, tend to underestimate the cost of planning and, actually the value of planning. So just as planning is important, planning a rollout of a tool is important. So there is prerequisites needed. And I talked about those prerequisites such as, make sure that people are aligned, people understand the benefits. And the best way to align people is to talk about money and saying, if something saves the company 1.5 to 2 crore rupees per annum, then I think it's worth the effort to change everybody's mindset. And actually, one of the big side effects and benefits of this whole coronavirus, has been that today people are ready for change. I've seen such a big difference in the mindset of everybody that I'm talking to in the last month and a half. Everybody has seen what kind of, it's a cataclysmic event which has happened and everybody is now ready for change. So I think this is a great time to be able to implement some of the mindset changes and SOPs that, maybe companies were scared of doing in the past.
I think, I mean, one thing which comes out very clearly is that people really shouldn't see it as an expenditure or as a liability, but it's an investment actually.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah.
Cool. I think so. There's one question coming. It's a very simple question that what is the approximate implementation timeframe for such a tool?
Okay, so it can vary from company to company. It depends upon what kind of products you do and what is your current level in terms of production planning. So anywhere between, so I would divide this into two parts. One portion is, the first thing one has to do is put in your TNA, or put in a tool where or put in a system where you are actually tracking your supply chain, merchandising, pre-production activities essentially. Because if your pre-production is totally messed up, you're not getting fabrics on time, you're not getting materials, are not coming in a timely manner, then no matter what tool you put in planning, you might put in, every day you're allocating lines and changing it all the time. It's a losing battle. It's a battle you will fight all the time. So I think putting that in place is important, and that takes anywhere between 6 to 9 months. Putting in, if you don't have a strong, TNA mechanism or a follow-up mechanism, one way to know, and it doesn't have to be a software, it can be anything, but you need to have an on-time PCD of more than 90% to know whether you are actually, you're following what you have. And today's day and age, if you're less than 90%, you're actually losing a lot of money because your pre-production is messed up. So that is 6 to 9 months. And when it comes to planning, another 6 to 9 months. So it's a process. It takes a while. But if you look at it, this comes to the heart of your organization. It is actually coming down to the core operations of a company. So anywhere between 12 to 18 months is a time frame of, putting these kinds of systems in, and it's a battle. It requires, again, people, I can see comments coming here where people talk about mindset, and yes, it's a mindset change.
Right. Is there any specialized manpower required for this? Unless somebody's asking that as well.
Usually not. I think what companies should do is, my recommendation is, because you see such kind of transformations don't happen, it requires effort and it requires people who are empowered. So if it is given as an additional responsibility to people who already given other responsibilities, then it becomes another extra thing they have to take care of it, right? So I think one approach will be useful is to have a business transformation team or a person, somebody who's kind of dedicated to make sure that the process is moved around. Of course, it doesn't mean they are doing the entries and they're doing everything. What it means is essentially they are driving it. They are ensuring that management is available when meetings have to happen. They ensure that everybody gets trained. They ensure that the SOP has been followed. So I think having that kind of a person or a team is useful. It is not necessary, but it is useful, because, or you pull out a person who's from the operations and say, for the next 6 months, 1 year, I want you to focus on this. But giving this as an additional responsibility to people who are already doing other things, it doesn't work.
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay. So I think we are kind of running out of time, Gunish. Before we finally conclude, I just want to actually share with all the attendees, I mean, that we as BlueKaktus, we have a PPC planning tool. We call it IPPC, along with the TNA tool, which actually can help in executing an effective plan. And in this tool, actually, there are from 5-6 key areas, tools we covered, which anyway Gunish has spoken about. For example, monitoring and tracking the overall TNA. TNA linked production planning tool. I mean, IPPC does the auto planning. Tracking plan versus actual. Monitoring the efficiency of plan versus actual. Monitoring the accuracy of the plan. Suggesting alternate plans. And tracking the plan versus actual cost. These are some of the things which our tool does give, and we'd be happy to kind of discuss it in much more detail. I think post this session, anybody wants to connect with us, we'd be very happy to do that. Connect with me or anybody in the sales team, or the general email ID which is available on the. I think that's it from our side. I mean, to conclude, maybe Gunish, I'd like to hand it over back to you, so you could maybe conclude it.
Well, sure. I mean, thanks, Sanjay, and thanks everyone. I think we're 11:59, so we're actually on time. So we've been on time, and I really appreciate everybody. And we saw that most people actually were there throughout the session, so which is a great thing. And I really appreciate everybody's feedback and thoughts. We will continue doing these sessions, which are focused on the apparel industry, because we really think this industry needs this kind of inputs and kind of a forum whereby these ideas can be shared, best practices can be shared with each other. And thank you so much once again for being very active participants. And really, also thanks Sanjay and to everybody having organized this. So I hope to keep doing this, and we keep meeting with each other, and I look forward to interacting with all of you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.